Hi, ladies and gentlemen, Chris of the Polish Geek, and I got a question for you. What was your very first video game in your life? What was this first video game you've ever played? We gamers all have this first video game in our lifetime, and they generally mean a lot to us. I mean, they got us into gaming after all, and they're all about our childhood. And chances are, your very first video game in your life was almost certainly a platformer. I mean, they're certainly the most accessible genre as well as the most kid-friendly, so chances are it was likely an either 2D or 3D platformer. Either one it could be, depending on your generation. And Donkey Kong Country was certainly my introduction to gaming. I've been playing all three of those games since childhood, and I mean very far childhood, I was 3 to 4 years old, and I've been playing those video games, all three of those video games, ever since then. And I've been playing them all the way back when I was 3 years old, and then, so yeah, I've been playing all three of them ever since I was a little kid, and I kept playing them as I was growing up, and even now I beat all three of them once a year. If there is one surefire way to describe my very little childhood, is Donkey Kong Country Trilogy. So let me take you on the journey about my childhood, my three favorite video games of all time, my childhood memories. Let me take you back in time and explore Donkey Kong Country Trilogy. The story of how Donkey Kong Country games were created is pretty interesting on its own, actually. Donkey Kong is one of the oldest Nintendo characters, and next to Mario and Luigi, probably the most famous one, even though the interesting thing is, Donkey Kong is actually older than Mario, in the name at least. Donkey Kong was clearly inspired by King Kong, come on, giant ape, throwing things, kidnapping a girl, and even having Kong in the name? Yeah, inspiration is just way too obvious, and Universal even sued Nintendo for copyright, but thankfully, Nintendo won, and Donkey Kong's first appearance was in the game called Donkey Kong, an arcade game, but it's interesting that Donkey Kong is actually a main villain in this game, and Mario is the hero, although at that point he was actually only called Jumpman, and Donkey Kong would kidnap a girl, very clearly an early version of Princess Peach, and Mario, or Jumpman, would have climbed up all the way and rescue the girl while jump over obstacles that Donkey Kong was throwing at the Mario or Jumpman, and the game was so successful that a year later a new game called Donkey Kong Jr. came out, and now the Jumpman was the main villain imprisoning Donkey Kong, while a little Donkey Kong was the new protagonist, and both games were pretty similar to each other and super short too. I did play them actually at some point in arcade, and I did even own a Game Boy Advance cartridge with a bunch of old games, and both were included. Jumpman though became known as Mario and became a symbol of the Nintendo company, who back then were seen as saviors and champions of gaming. And thankfully, they still very much are one of those few companies that still very much care for quality gaming. But at that point back then, Donkey Kong was completely forgotten at this point. And during the run of their very first console, NES, outside of both games getting ports on the Nintendo system, Donkey Kong wasn't really used as a character, and he was basically one of those forgotten Nintendo characters. But then, Nintendo released a new system called Super Nintendo, which I think is actually still the best system in gaming history. The graphics and pixels were super enhanced, and so many quality games were released, including Super Mario World, Super Castlevania 4, quality-driven JRPGs like Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, and Super Metroid. Yep, I think Super Nintendo is the greatest console in gaming history, and I still own Super Nintendo actually. And then Nintendo met with a British game developer called Rare, and they decided for Rare to do a platformer starring their long lost forgotten character Donkey Kong, and they very much gave Rare full creative freedom and control over the game too, which in retrospect proved to be a wonderful decision because Rare used their experience with 3D graphics to make a truly quality 3D platformer, and they put so much love into it. And of course, the sequels were even better. Donkey Kong Country Trilogy is as much a Rare game as it is a Nintendo game, and on November 21st, 1994, the first Donkey Kong Country game was publicly released in the US. And newsflash, it's only one day before my birthday, like I was born on November 22nd, 1994, and the game, Donkey Kong Country, rightfully turned out to be a huge success with splendid 3D visuals that truly pushed Nintendo to its limit, as well as just being an amazing 2D side-scrolling platformer in its own right. The overall look of all the three games is simply amazing. The games are unique in their attention to detail, for example, like games are technically 2D platformers, but the way their sprites look is 3D and so realistic, because thing is, the 3D models of characters were actually all created before sprites for actual games, and as a result, you have something like this. And all those games age so well, especially 2 and 3. You can argue one didn't age so well in relation to the other two, but that's what the sequels should do, right? Improve and elevate upon the magic of the original. All three of those video games have awesome, memorable music, amazing and challenging platforming gameplay, and they all just look so great. Environments are so authentic and immersive. Every level in each game feels unique to the other, and there's just so much attention to detail. Just by putting one of those 3 video games, I'm basically entering my own mini time machine just to go back in time to my childhood, back when I just played the hell out of all 3 of those video games. Although they were much harder time then. Now they are to me easy as hell, really. Donkey Kong Country is as nostalgic to me as you can get. As I said, I've been playing all 3 of those video games ever since I was a very little kid, and it all started is that when I was 3 years old, me and my family lived in like a small apartment, and the Super Nintendo that I still own, it's upstairs, is actually older than me, so yeah, my dad and my sister will be playing some Super Nintendo games, and Donkey Kong Country, most of them, actually 1 and 2, we got like 3 like a year later, we got 3 when we moved, but yeah, and I've been enjoying watching my dad and my sister just play those games, but I would also try to play them myself actually, even though I wasn't particularly good at them, but playing them throughout all my life, I've only been getting better and better, and now those games at this point are like super easy for me. I can literally like beat them all only in a day, literally. I mean, I can beat each one of them in like a day only at this point, and I got this good. So let me take you back in time on the journey of Donkey Kong Country, and this is actually end of part 1, because then in part 2 I will be discussing the first game, then the second game for part 3, and then finally the third game. The second game, by the way, is the best in the series. So, and also I might actually later do a bonus and also review Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, because this is still a great game. I mean, I don't have a nostalgic passion for it like I have for the original trilogy, but it's still a great game, so I'll maybe even do a bonus later of reviewing Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, but for now, this is the end of the first video. And now, soon expect part 2, which will be a review of the very first Donkey Kong Country game. Talk to you in the review of the first Donkey Kong Country. See you then.